Okay, the role of adipose tissue in the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes, the dysfunctional adipocytes. Okay, so the core defect of type 2 diabetes is the inability to utilize insulin due to insulin resistant and inadequate insulin secretion due to impaired beta cell function. Both defect leads to decreased insulin sensitivity and a decreased insulin secretion that leads to hyperglycemia. It is now established that the development of type 2 DM results from the interaction between genetic makeup of individuals and their environment. The development of insulin resistant, the obesogenic factor, seems to be the most important environmental factor. And if this insulin resistant occurs in the presence of genetically determined propensity to beta cell dysfunction, then glucose intolerance occur. Although there is still disagreement over the relative contribution in the alteration in insulin sensitivity versus beta cell function in the development of diabetes, nevertheless, it is becoming clear that reduction in both processes have already occurred by the time hyperglycemia develops. Just to overemphasize the importance of beta cell function in the context of core defect, when we learn our beta cell course that in the natural history of diabetes that determines the onset, the progression of the disease is the beta cell dysfunction and progressive beta cell failure respectively. Equally important perhaps, and so not to undermine insulin resistant, since insulin resistant put a lot of stress in genetically predisposed to beta cell failure. And perhaps if we can manage insulin resistant, then perhaps we can remove or at least limit the stress to the beta cells no matter how genetically weak the beta cells are. Now, if we are going to follow hierarchy of event leading to type 2 DM, many believe that insulin resistant is the initial event in the development of type 2 DM. There are rare chances that primary event is a beta cell failure, but mostly it all starts with insulin resistant. So treating or targeting insulin resistant therefore may delay or even prevent beta cell failure even in genetically predisposed beta cell to failure. So the question is, how prevalent is insulin resistant? Here, the study done by the group of Stephen Hafner, a 7-year follow-up of San Antonio Heart Study, looking at the progression to type 2 DM in 4 different groups of study. These are insulin resistant with low insulin secretion, insulin sensitivity with low insulin secretion, insulin sensitivity with good insulin secretion, and lastly, insulin resistant with good insulin secretion. So these subjects were subdivided according to insulin sensitivity and endogenous insulin secretion at baseline. So after 7 years, 195 of 1,734 subjects progressed to type 2 DM. That's about 11%. More than 80% of these 195 progressors were insulin resistant at baseline. So, in the study, insulin resistance was most strongly associated with progression to type 2 DM, with 83% of converters being insulin resistant, those who had insulin resistant regardless of their secretory status. The lowest risk of developing type 2 DM was in subjects who were insulin sensitive combined with good insulin secretory capacity. That's 1%. So, when we study beta cell, we put a lot of emphasis on beta cell function and dysfunction. Here, insulin resistant, which start with dysfunctional adipose tissue with an increase in free fatty acid, and this what I called lipocentric view. When we talk about insulin resistant, we always look at the adipose tissue. It starts with dysfunctional adipose tissue that leads to increase in free fatty acid level. Chronic elevation of circulating free fatty acid not only inhibit insulin secretion by various mechanisms but also induce beta cell apoptosis. Moreover, dysfunctional adipose tissue may lead to leptin resistant state which diminish leptin anti-apoptotic effect. In addition, the effect of beta cell it can also affect peripheral tissue by way of inflammatory adipokines leading to insulin resistance in the liver as well as in the muscles. Furthermore, adipocyte dysfunction leads to atherosclerosis by various mechanisms, free fatty acids and pro-inflammatory adipokines, and dyslipidemia altogether leads to atherosclerosis starting from endothelial dysfunction, atherosclerosis to plaque rupture leading to cardiovascular events. So how does insulin resistance develop and what tissue is involved first? Well, a combination of high energy intake, excess calorie such as high fat and high carbohydrates intake, low physical activity, favor the storage of surplus fat at adipose depot that far exceed their capacity to store. That is tantamount to lipid overload. This leads to overweight and obesity, balance between supply and activity or storage versus mobilization of triglycerides. Obesity means dysfunctional adipose tissue that leads to increase in free fatty acid and many other metabolic disturbances, including hyperglycemia. Now, this is the relationship between body mass index, BMI, and risk for diabetes in the U.S. health professional derived from data extracted from Chan et al. As you can see that BMI increases, so does the risk of type 2 DM, starting at BMI at 27 to 28. And exponentially thereafter. And this strongly suggests that fat has something to do with hyperglycemia. When we look at free fatty acid on both healthy and type 2 DM, individuals with type 2 diabetes have impaired postprandial suppression of free fatty acid, and the link between elevated plasma free fatty acid level and insulin resistance come from observation that both acute and chronic increase in plasma free fatty acid induce insulin resistance. Moreover, lowering of free fatty acid level with nicotinic acid derivatives, acp-MOX, improves glucose tolerance in obese individuals with or without diabetes. Okay, the connection between insulin secretion and insulin sensitivity is illustrated here by Richard Bergen's the disposition curve or the disposition index. The relationship between insulin secretion and insulin sensitivity traces a curve wherein people with high insulin sensitivity, shown at the lower section of the curve, beta cell release only a small amount of insulin. As insulin resistance increases, shifting toward the upper region of the curve, the pancreas responds by boosting insulin production, indicating improved beta cell activity. Individual can move along this curve, increasing or decreasing insulin secretion to match changes in insulin sensitivity, as long as beta cell can adjust their insulin output accordingly. Blood sugar or blood glucose level remain within normal range. However, when beta cell function failed to keep up with rising insulin resistance, this balance is lost, leading to elevated blood sugar level which is hyperglycemia. At this point, the disposition index, a measure of beta cell compensation relative to insulin sensitivity, begins to decline, indicating a breakdown in glucose regulation. So if we talk on adipose tissue, we talk on relationship between free fatty acid and insulin. And this is the dose response curve of free fatty acid versus insulin. And it is also followed by a hyperbolic curve. An insulin concentration increases, lipolysis is suppressed, thus free fatty acid reduces in a non-linear curve. In presence of insulin resistance, the curve is shifted to the right, indicating that for the same insulin level, lipolysis is less suppressed and circulating free fatty acid level are higher. In other words, you need more insulin to suppress lipolysis in insulin-resistant individuals. In a big picture, when we look at type 2 DM, we're looking at the tip of the iceberg. At the top, it's hyperglycemia, but at the deep down below, at the very bottom of it, you see increase in lipogenesis, obesity, increased waist hip ratio, atherosclerosis, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistant, dyslipidemia, before dysglycemia. All of these represent dysfunctional adipose tissue. So it's just reasonable to start early and focus our attention to dysfunctional adipose tissue. So to appreciate this presentation, we need an in-depth review of the importance of adipocyte biology and its impact on glucose metabolism. It starts with normal adipose tissue with all the excess calories, increase in weight, hypertrophy of adipose tissue, especially in the increase in visceral adiposity. Adipose tissue becomes hypertrophic or dysfunctional adipose tissue, leading to increase in free fatty acid and all these pro-inflammatory adipokines leading to insulin resistance and eventually diabetes. In short, the sequence starts with normal adipose tissue, becomes dysfunctional adipose tissue with increased free fatty acid, and then deposit to other organs that are not supposed to deposit fat, which is called ectopic fat. There is lipotoxicity and eventually insulin resistance. So the reduction in the lipid storage capacity in adipose tissue observed in obesity leads to an increase in non-esterified fatty acid in the bloodstream and their influx into the muscles, the pancreas, and the liver. This process leads to insulin resistance, reduced glucose uptake in the muscle, increased glucose synthesis in the liver, reduction in the synthesis, and increased release in the pancreas, and consequence hyperglycemia, characteristic of type 2 DM. And this basically the link between adipose tissue dysfunction and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so to gain a deeper understanding of adipose tissue role in the development of type 2 DM, it is essential to first review its anatomical structures. Now there are two main types of fat distribution: the apple-shaped pattern and the pear-shaped pattern. In the apple-shaped pattern, fat primarily accumulates in the upper body, including the visceral fat surrounding internal organs, and this upper body fat depot plays a key role in storing fat after eating and releasing free fatty acid between meals to supply energy to the liver, muscles, and other tissue, which help conserve glucose for brain use. While the visceral fat tends to break down fat more readily, has a higher lipolytic activity compared to subcutaneous fat. In short, the pear-shaped pattern, in contrast, involved fat storage mainly in the lower body typically as subcutaneous fat, which is less active in releasing free fatty acid and has a different metabolic profile. Now, the diagram that you are seeing right now is the diagram of the lipolytic as well as the lipogenic pathway that help us understand how adipose tissue become dysfunctional by disrupting the delicate balance between fat breakdown and fat synthesis or creation. Lipid metabolism and mobilization controlled by adipose tissue, that's lipogenesis, is a process by which carbohydrates is converted into fatty acid and promote the biosynthesis of triglycerides and expansion of lipid droplets in adipocytes. Lipolysis is an opposite way, break down triglycerides to free fatty acid and glycerol that can be either oxidized and released. The uptake of circulating free fatty acid by liver, muscle, and other tissue is the main pathways of lipid mobilization. Both lipogenic and lipolytic pathway are sensitive to nutrition as well as hormones such as insulin, norepinephrine, as well as glucagon. So, the hormones are tightly regulate adipocyte lipolysis to balance energy need. Catecholamines such as adrenergic beta-3 adrenergic receptor activate lipolysis by triggering cyclic AMP and pKa signaling, which stimulate enzymes like adipocyte triglyceride lipase and hepatic sensitive lipase to break down fat. Insulin counters this by lowering cyclic AMP, inhibiting this enzyme, promoting fat storage. Other hormones and signaling pathways fine-tune this process, ensuring adipocytes respond appropriately to metabolic demands. When hormones controls of fat breakdown fails, excess free fatty acid disrupts signaling or insulin signaling, causing insulin resistance and driving the development of type 2 diabetes. This makes adipose tissue dysfunction a key factor in type 2 DM pathogenesis. Now, insulin primarily function to inhibit lipolysis and enhance lipid storage within adipose tissue, which exhibits high sensitivity to insulin signaling. During the initial phase of insulin resistance, despite impaired glucose transport in the peripheral tissues, the anti-lipolytic effect of insulin on adipocytes remained largely preserved, facilitating continued fat accumulation. Now, prolonged adipose tissue expansion contribute to adipocyte dysfunction, exacerbating systemic insulin resistance. This impaired insulin signaling ultimately diminishes the hormone's capacity to suppress lipolysis, resulting in an increased circulating free fatty acid concentration. Now, the excess calories and inactivity causes obesity and characterized by adipocyte hypertrophy. Adipose tissue is extremely sensitive to insulin concentration, inhibiting lipolysis at insulin concentration that are much lower than those needed to inhibit hepatic glucose production or stimulate muscle glucose uptake. So early on in insulin resistant state in which glucose transport is impaired to insulin anti-lipolytic effect, it's relatively preserved, resulting in maintenance or expansion of adipose tissue. And because of this expansion over time, adipocyte, which eventually leads to dysfunctional adipose tissue that further impaired insulin signaling and more insulin resistant, causing resistance to anti-lipolytic effect of insulin, thus resulting to an increase in free fatty acid. So free fatty acid turnover in the visceral and subcutaneous adipose tissue. This is taken from Amner P. Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism Okay, this article shows that in vitro data suggests that free fatty acids are more readily mobilized from omental adipose tissue than from subcutaneous adipose tissue. There is regional differences in lipolysis in human adipose tissue. Number 1, the lipolytic effect of noradrenaline was 4 to 5-fold more marked in abdominal adipocytes than in the gluteal fat cells. Number 2, the regional differences was more apparent in female than in male. Number 3, the beta-adrenergic lipolytic sensitivity was 10 to 20 times greater in abdominal adipocytes from both sexes than in the gluteal adipocytes. Number 4, visceral fat tissue is an important contributor to plasma free fatty acid levels as its adipocytes are more lipolytically active than subcutaneous adipocytes and are more sensitive to fat mobilizing enzyme. And lastly, abdominal fat depot release free fatty acid directly into the portal vein, which would be expected to expose the liver to a higher level of free fatty acids than would otherwise be expected from the systemic free fatty acid availability. Visceral adiposity have a greater beta-adrenergic lipolytic sensitivity than subcutaneous adipocytes. Now, free fatty acid uptake by gender. Now, women tend to have higher free fatty acid levels during fasting but handle them better, largely due to its female hormone, the estrogen protective effect that help maintain insulin sensitivity and promote subcutaneous storage. Men, on the other hand, oxidize more fat during exercise, influenced by higher androgen level, but may be more susceptible to free fatty acid-related metabolic issues. These hormonal differences drive gender-specific pattern in free fatty acid uptake and metabolism, contributing to variation in metabolic health and disease risk. So, metabolic flexibility is not an exclusively a function of absolute fat mass. Now, plotting fat mass versus the degree of insulin resistance does not reveal a strictly linear relationship. It's more of a scattered all over. Many fall into the category of metabolically unhealthy obese individual. That means the more adipose tissue you have, the more metabolically challenged you are. However, some individual falls into the category of metabolically healthy obese despite having relatively high BMIs. They display normal metabolic parameters even though they may not be immune to future pathophysiological changes as a consequence of the increased fat mass. The other extreme is lipodystrophy, reflecting the metabolically unhealthy lean individual displaying severe metabolic dysfunction despite the fact that these individuals have very little or in some instances almost no adipose tissue to cope with. The review on these articles highlight that combining BMI and metabolic healthy better classified obesity. It identifies 4 groups: metabolically healthy, unhealthy normal weight and obese. Metabolically healthy obese individual may still develop metabolic issues over time. So metabolic screening beyond BMI is quite important for all. Now, when we examine and compare the metabolic markers of the two, the difference becomes clear. Metabolically healthy adults exhibit more favorable circulating profiles, including lower level of inflammatory markers, balanced adipokines, beneficial amino acids derivatives, organic acids, and higher vitamin D levels compared to metabolically unhealthy obese individuals. So with the molecular differences between metabolically healthy obese and metabolically unhealthy obese, the metabolically healthy obese individual continues to show advantages in immune cell infiltration, biological pathway, as well as profile of amino acid and their derivatives. So, metabolically healthy obese refers to individuals with obesity who maintain a normal metabolic profile such as insulin sensitivity and lipid levels. While this may seem protective, many metabolically healthy obese, for short MHO, individuals eventually develop metabolic dysfunction, making it potentially transient state. The metabolic paradox, this is where obesity appears to offer survival benefit in certain diseases, is now seen as a statistical artifact. Newer research emphasizes adipose tissue quality over quantity with the treatment like anti-obesity drug like incretin hormones or GLP-1 receptor agonists, improving metabolic health regardless of weight. Obesity remains a complex condition with both light and dark side. So, the summary between metabolically healthy obese and metabolically unhealthy obese, this is taken from a newly published data. Very interesting. Number one, MHO, metabolically healthy obese individuals show a lower level of inflammatory immune cells in visceral fat and maintain better insulin sensitivity. While metabolically unhealthy obese individuals exhibit increased immune cell infiltrates, as I've shown you before, adipose inflammation, higher risk for metabolic disease like type 2 DM. So, the recent studies reveal distinct gene expression and immune profile between the two, especially in visceral adipose tissue. As well as there is problem with epigenetic modifications such as DNA methylation persists even after weight loss, influencing long-term metabolic outcome in metabolically unhealthy obese. These findings suggest that metabolically healthy individual may be a temporary state with a potential progression to metabolically unhealthy obese, depending on immune and molecular pressures. So, identifying cellular as well as epigenetic markers may help personalize obesity treatment and predict metabolic risk. So, in other words, these findings highlight the need for early intervention even in obese individuals who appear metabolically healthy. Now, let's go now to the expansion of adipose tissue. Growth versus multiplication. Expansion of fat requires either increase in adipocyte size, that's hypertrophy, or increase adipocyte number, and that is hyperplasia. So it's growth versus multiplication. Mechanisms that regulate adipocyte lipid storage permit hypertrophy with an increase in nutrient load. However, large hypertrophic adipocytes face limits of expansion based on multiple factors, including hypoxia and differential matrix mechanics that result in dysfunctional adipocyte. Okay. Alternatively, adipocyte hyperplasia may represent a mechanism of healthy fat storage capacity. Matured adipocytes are terminally differentiated cell. However, adipocyte precursors have been identified in adipose tissue that differentiate into fully matured white adipocyte under metabolic stimulation or PPAR activation both in vitro and in mouse. Now, unfortunately, factors that regulate adipocyte hypertrophy as well as hyperplasia are yet to be completely clarified. The unregulated adipose tissue lipolysis resulting in an ectopic deposition of lipid in non-adipocyte tissue further exacerbating systemic insulin resistance. The lipid spillover mechanism to other cell types leading to ectopic deposition is partially causative for the collective pathologies that encompasses the metabolic syndrome. Obesity-associated metabolic decline is not due to adiposity per se, but rather is a result of an insufficient capacity of adipose tissue to further expand. This leads to adipose tissue dysfunction and persistent elevated level of plasma glucose and lipids which accumulate in other tissues and contribute to insulin resistance. The proposed molecular mechanism by which ectopic lipid accumulates leads to insulin resistance, number 1, is ectopic lipid accumulate in the muscle and liver cells, raises diacylglycerol or aka DAG levels, which activate protein kinase C, and this protein kinase C, PKC, triggers a phosphorylation cascade that inhibit insulin receptor substrate 1 function, reducing activation of PI3 kinase and downstream AKT2. This impair GLUT4 translocation in the skeletal muscle, lowering glucose uptake and disrupt liver metabolism by increasing glucose production. Together, these effects contribute to insulin resistance characteristic of metabolic disease. Now, fat accumulation in non-adipose tissue promotes cell dysfunction, insulin resistance, and inflammation in liver, muscle, pancreas, as well as visceral fat. Also, in the vessels and heart, lipotoxicity leads to increased risk for cardiovascular disease and arteriosclerosis. Now, let's go now to the 3 types of adipocytes. The morphology differences between these 3 types of adipocyte. From left to right, white, and then in the middle, beige adipocyte and brown adipocyte are the number of lipid droplets and mitochondria. They also differ in the lineage origin, gene expression, as well as function. The brown represent more mitochondria, that's why they are colored brown compared to white or beige. Beige has a in-between numbers of mitochondria in between white adipose tissue and brown adipose tissue. In the 2014 review by Giordano et al. Highlight the remarkable plasticity of the adipose organ, describing how white, brown, and newly identified pink adipocyte can transdifferentiate in response to physiologic demand. White fat stores energy, brown fat burn it for heat, and pink fat derived from white adipose during pregnancy, which support lactation. This transition, driven by environmental as well as hormonal cues, have major implication for metabolic health as well as disease. Now, these are the difference characteristic of brown and white adipose tissue. White adipose tissue at the bottom primarily store energy as large lipid droplets and have low mitochondrial content. That's why they are colored white compared to the brown adipose tissue, which contain more mitochondria, making them metabolically less active. In contrast, on top, brown adipose tissue are rich in mitochondria and specialized in burning fat to produce heat through a non-severing thermogenesis, thanks to the protein uncoupling protein 1, or UCPI for short. While white fat contributes to energy storage and metabolic disease risk, brown fat enhances energy expenditure and may protect against obesity. You look at the newborn and infant, the brown adipose tissue is abundant, up to 5 to 10% of body weight, but brown adipose tissue presence decline with age, but remnants persist in areas like the supraclavicular, paravertebral, and perirenal regions. And this is the evidence. The proof came from the recent imaging studies using PET scan that metabolically active brown adipose tissue was seen and exists in healthy adult human, contrary to earlier belief. This BAT or brown adipose tissue is found mainly in areas like the neck, the upper chest, and is activated by cold exposure and sympathetic nervous signals. Its presence is linked to better metabolic health and suggests potential for therapies targeting obesity and metabolic diseases. Masayuki Saito in 2013 review in Diabetes and Metabolism Journal emphasizes the role of brown adipose tissue as a key regulator of energy expenditure and body fat in human. Once thought to be negligible in adult, brown adipose tissue is now recognized as metabolically active, especially during cold exposure and after spontaneous hyperphagia. Its activity varies with age and body composition. Being lower in older or obese individuals, the paper also highlight that capsaicin and capsinoid can activate brown adipose tissue by a transient receptor potential channel, offering potential strategies to modestly increase energy expenditure and reduce adiposity. So, these are the food or certain food that contain bioactive compound that stimulate brown adipose tissue, enhancing thermogenesis and energy expenditure that are listed here. Ingredients like capsaicin or chili peppers, catechins that are present abundantly in green tea, resveratrol or green or red grapes, and curcumin or turmeric activate brown adipose tissue by mitochondrial pathway, especially through the uncoupled protein. And these dietary triggers may support metabolic health, reduce visceral fat, and component strategies for obesity, as well as insulin-resistant management. Now we go to therapeutic approach. There is non-pharmacologic approach. There is novel pharmacologic approach for improved adipocyte function, supercharging the brown adipose tissue to fight obesity, and probably metabolic surgery to improve adipocyte function. So how do our biological rhythm and different eating habits influence the control of white adipose tissue browning? Number 1, melatonin, which regulated by circadian rhythm, promotes norepinephrine release that activates beta-adrenergic receptor, driving the browning of white adipose tissue and activation of brown fat. So, nighttime food intake tends to disrupt melatonin secretion and can impair the browning of white adipose tissue rather than enhance it. Number 3, intermittent fasting and caloric restriction enhance base fat recruitment, improve metabolism, reduce inflammation, and reshape the gut microbiome to support thermogenesis. In contrast, obesogenic diet leads to unhealthy white adipose tissue expansion, causing inflammation, cell stress, and impaired browning. In addition, Lee et al. In 2017 demonstrated that intermittent fasting promotes the browning of white adipose tissue and reduces obesity by reshaping the gut microbiota. In mice, every other day fasting increased UCP1 expression and Bates fat formation even before weight loss occurred. Transferring microbiota from a fasted mice to germ-free mice replicated this effect, confirming that gut microbes mediate fasting-induced thermogenesis. Of course, these are preclinical trials. These are animal trials. Now, excess calorie intake leads to chronic inflammation in perivascular adipose tissue, impairing its protective vascular function. Intermittent fasting has shown that it can counteract this by activating anti-inflammatory, thermogenic, and bioenergetic pathways, restoring the perivascular adipose tissue homeostasis and improving vascular health. The key molecular players here includes AMPK, beta-3 adrenergic receptor, and of course UCP1 or uncoupling protein 1 that is present in the mitochondria and present a large amount in brown adipose tissue. And here is a study by Yudasaka et al. Demonstrates that fasting induces structural changes in brown adipose tissue, especially increasing vascular permeability. Using carbon nanotubes as fluorescent probes, researchers observed widened intercellular spaces and altered collagen structures in brown adipose tissue of fasted mice. These changes allowed the probes to penetrate the redistribute within the brown adipose tissue, revealing a previously unknown fluid dynamic response to fasting. So here are the following several mechanisms that are known to drive brown adipose tissue if you do intermittent fasting. It activates brown adipose tissue during intermittent fasting. The mechanism involves there are a lot: adrenergic activation, increase in UCP1 expression, even we mentioned already gut microbiota remodeling, and increase in small chain fatty acid production that is related to microbes, microbiota, and the succinate accumulation. The succinate accumulation, when you do intermittent fasting, it elevates these molecules which enhance mitochondrial respiration and thermogenesis and also activate UPCI. It also has an anti-inflammatory, and we talk about circadian synchronization that is aligned with intermittent fasting, with increase in aligning the melatonin rhythm, supporting adrenergic thermogenesis. Now, what about cold exposure? These are some of the data, okay, that shows that cold triggers skin thermogenesis, brain signals, sympathetic nerve, norepinephrine release, and the beta-3 adrenergic receptor activation, which activate the UCPI-driven heat production in bat, the non-severing thermogenesis. And it shows here that studies to show that chronic cold exposure can lead to an increase in activation of brown adipose tissue. Now, cold exposure before and after birth affects brown adipose tissue and non-severing thermogenesis. In both infant and adulthood, acute cold activates brown adipose tissues and increase non-severing thermogenesis to maintain body temperature. Prolonged cold exposure enlarges brown adipose tissue, enhancing non-severing thermogenesis capacity and cold tolerance. Additionally, NST or non-severing thermogenesis ability in adult may be influenced by their parents' cold exposure around fertilization, indicating inherited adaptation. So what is actually non-severing thermogenesis? It is a process which the body producing heat without severing by burning energy brown fat, especially when exposed to cold. In infant and newborn, they don't have that large skeletal muscle surface, so they don't sever to produce heat when they are exposed to cold. So they have a lot of brown adipose tissue to save them, to burn energy to increase their body temperature. Now, the UCPI in brown fat mitochondria convert energy from fat into heat instead of storing, okay, helping regulate body temperature and increase metabolism. So the non-severing thermogenesis play a vital role in newborn, as I mentioned, cold-adapted adults, and during fasting or adrenergic stimulation to generate heat without severing. Now, these are some of the novel therapeutic agents targeting human brown adipose tissue. Top of the line is anti-obesity liraglutide. There are the mechanism. It increased cold-induced brown adipose tissue activity that was shown in PET scan. Mirabegron, which is beta-adrenergic receptor agonist, directly stimulate BAT thermogenesis. It increases UCPI. Resveratrol, which is a polyphenol, okay, it increases beige adipocyte, okay, recruitment. Now, white doesn't go right away to brown adipose tissue. If we want to stimulate white adipose tissue to increase their thermogenesis, they would increase their mitochondria and they become beige. Okay, FGF21 analog, we have the capsinoid and irisin mimetic. These are the maybe in the development in terms of novel therapeutic agents. Now, how about bariatric surgery and brown adipose tissue? What's the score? Bariatric surgery doesn't just reduce weight. According to this data, it also appears to enhance brown adipose tissue activity and promote browning of white adipose tissue, adding a powerful thermogenic dimension to its metabolic benefits. So in summary, the role of adipose tissue in type 2 DM: white adipose tissue dysfunction disrupts signaling, insulin signaling, and promote inflammation, driving systemic insulin resistance, may cause eventually type 2 DM. The pro-inflammatory adipokines of dysfunctional adipocyte that is in addition to reduce adipopectin, which is a good adipokines, contribute to metabolic imbalance. Brown adipose tissue mediates thermogenesis by UCPI1, increasing energy expenditure and improving glucose metabolism. Brown adipose tissue activity decreases with age but can be revitalized through cold exposure, intermittent fasting, certain dietary compound, and drugs such as GLP-1 receptor agonists as well as beta-3 adrenergic agonists. Metabolically healthy obese individuals have better insulin sensitivity and less visceral fat despite being obese. But over time, many may develop metabolic complication and transition to metabolically unhealthy obese status. Metabolically unhealthy obese is characterized by increased visceral fat, chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and higher risk of type 2 DM and cardiovascular disease. Recent studies reveal distinct cellular and molecular profile between the two, including immune cells composition, epigenetic modification influencing metabolic outcomes. Mitochondrial dysfunction, especially involving altered succinate metabolism, is increasingly recognized as a central contributor to adipocyte impairment and development of insulin resistance. So, targeting adipose tissue dysfunction, enhancing brown adipose tissue activity represent a promising therapeutic strategies for type 2 DM prevention as well as management.